When the mob film subgenre is mentioned, what director comes to mind? Some would say Francis Ford Coppola, who directed the Godfather trilogy, a staple of the genre. Others would tell you it's Robert Harmon, who directed the famous hit TV film Gotti. For a vast majority of filmmakers, including myself, there's only one name that comes to mind, one that stands tall above the rest: Martin Scorsese. The term household name can't even begin to describe his repertoire, nor would it do the man justice. His style is one of a kind, and he's created decade-defining masterpieces that not only introduced fantastic and complicated characters, but also compelling tales in a biographical format, based on true stories and real people. If you don't know who Scorsese is, then you need to watch the American crime films that he's renowned for. Films like Mean Streets, The Departed, Casino, Goodfellas, and most recently, The Irishman. Goodfellas being my favorite, a marvelous, powerful, and compelling biographical film that defined the 90s, an absolute masterpiece to say the least. Because of his well-known style and delivery, one that resulted in huge success, it's believed, although not confirmed, that the term Scorsese's formula was conceived. The definition of this term being that unless you make a mob film exactly like Scorsese's, then it's doomed to fail. Over the years, plenty of directors of various calibers attempted to go against the grain, to innovate and create a new trend in an already tired and abused subgenre, but to no avail. If not that, then there were creators other than Scorsese that have made excellent mob films, but they all followed a similar pattern or arc. They played it safe and stuck with what works, rather than to truly break out of the mold. Then along came Carlito's Way in 1993, directed by Brian De Palma and written by David Cope, who referenced the writings of Edwin Torres, the author of the original novels titled Carlito's Way and its sequel After Hours. The film was distributed by Universal Pictures and was filmed with a budget of $30 million, while subsequently receiving earnings of $63.8 million at the box office. While not a smash hit during its original release, receiving mixed reviews from critics, the film itself garnered a cult following, achieving cult film status. This film is known to be one of Al Pacino's best performances, with Sean Penn, Penelope Ann Miller, and John Leguizamo alongside him, half of which were given Golden Globes for their work. This is the second film in which Pacino and director De Palma have worked together, the first being Scarface just 10 years prior in 1983. The real question is this: does this film do well in separating from Scorsese's supposed formula, achieving originality successfully? Or does it fall apart under the weight of its own ambition? Let's find out right here on Prime Reviews. New York, 1975. The story focuses on Carlito Brigante, a Puerto Rican mob legend released from prison after serving 5 of a 30-year sentence, due to a legal technicality exploited by his close friend and lawyer Dave Kleinfeld. Because of his time inside, Brigante decides that the crime underground is a dead end, vows to go legit, and earn enough money to escape to the Caribbean, where he plans to retire. At first, it seems like a clean break. He respectfully cuts ties with associates in good standing, and wants to open a nightclub to earn the $75,000 goal. As the film progresses, his past comes back to haunt him in more ways than one, putting distance between himself and his goals. Potential crime successors taking over what he once had, old friends turning against him, temptations that seem almost impossible to ignore, and having a reckless, cokehead mob lawyer as a friend doesn't help either, especially when he sees himself as more of a crook than a servant of the law. Now, without spoiling anything, here's what the film gets right. First, it's no surprise to anyone that Pacino and Penn both have exceptional film resumes with a wide acting scope. This film is no exception. Pacino shines as Brigante and harnesses the role well, while Sean Penn convinces the audience that he's someone else entirely as Kleinfeld. Both characters are perfect foils for one another, which is needed for a film like this. Carlito is cautious and serious, whereas Kleinfeld is reckless, impulsive, and always finds ways to land the two into trouble. Without Kleinfeld as a character, it would be very difficult for Brigante to carry the film on his own, and too easy for him to go legit. To put it simply, the characters are like yin and yang, and it shows. The film also introduces a handful of characters, such as Gale, Pachenga, Sasso, Lalin, the Taglialucci brothers, Guajiro, and of course, Benny Blanco from the Bronx. Try saying that 5 times really fast. I was intrigued by these characters and felt that their addition helped with the film's authenticity. It's not merely a mob film that stands out from the original repertoire, but it's also one where the characters surrounding Carlito add to the stakes in their own way. The scenes put in place felt authentic as much as the environment and setting. I felt like I was being teleported back to the mid-70s. The cinematography, and everything in that vein, is gorgeous. Good shots, beautiful transitions, and not overly saturated with practical or visual effects. And finally, saving the best for last, the film goes against the formula in a couple of ways. The focus isn't so much on the Italian mob syndicate that we're used to seeing. The mafia's presence is implied rather than making themselves known. Most successful mob films focus on the mafia more or less. This one certainly doesn't. To add, usually those films portray characters who are in the thick of that life or narrating a retelling of their rise to becoming a gangster and their fall as they enter witness protection or something similar, something deemed disgraceful in the eyes of the mob. With Carlito's Way, it's about a man who's committed crimes all of his life, a crime legend in his own right, but wants to try something new, a life that doesn't involve violence. It's refreshing to say the least. Crime plays second fiddle to Carlito's wants and desires while still being the key theme. We see Pacino's character pursue a love interest as well as his goal to reach the Caribbean, all while trying to ignore people that he used to know as well as avoiding trouble in any given scenario, especially ones that would involve Carlito referring back to old methods. He consistently takes the high ground, if not attempts to, in the situations he finds himself in. Each time he ends up in a bad spot, it's clear he wants nothing to do with it, but has no other choice but to go back to his old ways. This makes Carlito somewhat of a tragic character, which is an exceptionally rare sight in mob films. Normally, you would find it hard to sympathize with that certain type of character based on his despicable actions, but we never get an indication of the things Carlito got up to back in the day, besides dealing heroin. It's left to our imagination, which I think is a plus. This allows the audience to paint Carlito a certain way, adding to the narrative. Now back to the original question. Does this film succeed in going against Scorsese's formula? Well, simply put, no. I found the film to be underwhelming at times, and the plot seems to be more or less dialogue-heavy rather than focusing on action-filled scenes and morbid violence we're so used to seeing in other mob titles. It's clear the writers were trying to take creative risks in order to achieve originality, rather than playing it safe and sticking to typical mob tropes. While it's admirable, and not from a lack of trying, it's not as effective as they may have hoped. The film definitely struggles with time management, and felt that certain scenes could have been shorter. They drag on a bit too long. The film suffers ultimately from the overall predictability with the film's plot, as well as its carelessness with additional characters, aside from Al Pacino and Sean Penn's duo. Smaller, insignificant characters are killed before they're even fully developed, and sometimes they're killed within minutes of being introduced on screen. It really makes me wonder why they were even put in this film to begin with. Every character besides the aforementioned two lacked depth, development, and originality. I hardly cared whether any of them lived or died and felt they were simply thrown in there to complete and set the scenes, rather than being used to propel the plot forward. For example, Brigante's love interest, Gail, is absolutely useless and truly contributes nothing to the plot, almost as if they threw her into Brigante's arc for the hell of it, if not to make him seem more human or for the sake of sex appeal. Basically, if you were to take her out of the film entirely, the results would be the same. And besides, how could you even begin to argue she has any development whatsoever when most of her lines are,
Charlie. Jesus Christ, Charlie. Charlie.
Yeah, annoying to say the least. I can see that they were trying to make her this beacon of light for Carlito to keep him on the right path, but they have to do a lot more than what we, the audience, have received in order for it to be effective. Another example would be, you guessed it, our boy Benny Blanco from the Bronx. Leguizamo is intriguing as this character, and makes a decent adversary and successor to Carlito, but the character is severely undercooked in terms of development, and same goes for La Lynn. The acting is superb, but there isn't enough detail. They only get one to a handful of scenes without much backstory or why Carlito should avoid them and how he knows these characters personally. There's no detail whatsoever. To put it simply, besides the main characters, the rest of them are thrown in there as a means to an end. It seems as if David Koepp had the impression that, since most of these characters are from Carlito's past, that's all we really need to know, and that the details don't really matter. Oh, but they do! When detailed characters are killed or do a particular action, it adds impact. If they're undercooked, the impact is gone, and it just appears as lackluster. Simple as that. Carlito's Way is a decent film with an interesting and refreshing plot that we're not used to seeing in this abused subgenre. The intentions of the director and writer were crystal clear, at least for me, and this film really had a chance to be a foil to a well-established formula. Does this film do exactly that? Well, unfortunately, it falls short of what it was trying to accomplish due to insignificant and undercooked characters, as well as certain story elements being predictable. There must be a film out there that goes against the grain, but it sure isn't Carlito's way. I rate this film 3 out of 5, which is very typical for a cult film. While it doesn't achieve its own formula, and went against my expectations, it's still a film worth watching for the attempt, as well as Pacino and Penn's performances. There are some good elements here that other film enthusiasts can draw away from, and, if anything, this film could also be used as an educational tool for those who want to break the Scorsese mold themselves. It may not be the best mob film ever, but it sure does present some alternative ideas that every filmmaker, new and old, should take note of.